They told me 11 months ago. 11 months. And I remember sitting in that office. The doctor is talking. Her lips are moving. I can see the fluorescent light flickering just slightly above her head. And the only thought I have is, I never called my brother back. That was it. Not my wife, not my kids, not the mortgage or the trip to Portugal we kept postponing. My brother called me 3 weeks before, and I thought, I'll get to that. I'm 71 years old, and I thought I'd get to it. I want to talk to you today about what I actually believe comes next. Not what religion says, not what the grief counselors hand you in a laminated pamphlet. What I believe based on what I've read, what I've watched, and what I've felt sitting in this body that is slowly failing me in ways I didn't expect. Because here's the thing nobody tells you when you get a diagnosis like mine. The dying itself, the actual moment of it, might not be what you're afraid of. And I want to spend some time on that, because I think it might change something for you. About 18 months before my own diagnosis, I came across research out of the University of Michigan. They were studying people in cardiac arrest, and what they found was that in the final moments before death, the brain doesn't go quiet, it surges. Gamma wave activity, the kind associated with heightened consciousness, with dreaming, with the most vivid experiences a person can have, it spikes. Not in 1 or 2 patients, in most of them. The brain, in its last seconds, is more electrically alive than it is when you're sitting here reading the news over breakfast. Now, I am not telling you that means there's a heaven or a tunnel of light, or your grandmother waiting on a park bench. What I am telling you is that whatever that experience is, the science suggests it is not nothing. And for a guy like me, who has spent most of his adult life pretty skeptical of anything I couldn't measure, that stopped me cold. My friend Dennis, we went to college together. He was an engineer, the most rational person I've ever met, the kind of guy who categorized his vinyl records by release date and would argue with you about it. Dennis died of a brain tumor 4 years ago at 67. His wife Carol, who is warm and honest in a way that doesn't leave room for exaggeration, told me that in his last hours he kept reaching toward the ceiling, not in distress, like he was trying to catch something. She said he looked curious. Curious, that's the word she used. And Carol is not the type to romanticize things. She's the type who, 3 days after the funeral, was already reorganizing Dennis's books to donate, because she said sitting still was worse. When a person like Carol says her engineer husband looked curious in his final moments, I hold on to that. So here's what I believe. I believe the ending is less violent than the living. I believe the body knows what it's doing, and I believe the hard part isn't dying. The hard part is everything you left undone. That's where the real suffering is. My wife and I have been married 44 years. Her name is Helen, and I want to be honest with you about something I'm not proud of. When I got my diagnosis, my first instinct was to protect her, to handle everything quietly so she wouldn't have to. I thought that was love. It wasn't. It was control dressed up as kindness. Because what Helen needed, what she told me in a conversation we had 3 months ago, that I should have had with her 3 years ago was to be let in, not protected from, let in. She said, and I'm quoting her directly here, "I have been your wife for 44 years, and you are still trying to manage me." And she wasn't wrong. We lost years of real conversation because I thought keeping things smooth was the same as being close. It isn't. I see this with other people our age. A woman named Margaret, she's 69. She comes to my support group at the cancer center. Margaret's husband got a pancreatic diagnosis last spring, and she told the group, almost embarrassed to say it, that the 6 months since his diagnosis had been the most honest months of their 38-year marriage, that they had finally talked about the things they spent decades working around, the disappointments, the fears, the what-ifs. She said, and this stuck with me, we should have needed a death sentence to do this, but I'm glad we finally did. Here's what I think about that. We tell ourselves we are protecting the people we love by not bringing up the hard things, the diagnosis, the finances, the fact that your adult kids have no idea where the will is or what your wishes are. We tell ourselves the conversation will happen eventually, that there's time, and maybe there is time, but I'm asking you directly, what are you waiting for? What specifically are you waiting for? Because I want to tell you about the paperwork side of this. And I know that sounds like a gear shift, but stay with me, because it's not separate from what I'm talking about. It's the same thing. When I was diagnosed, my wife and I had to figure out, in the middle of grief, whether I had an advance directive, whether she knew where the life insurance documents were, whether my beneficiary designations were current, and they weren't, by the way. I had my mother listed on one account, and she died in 2014, 12 years. I just never updated it. We had to sort through all of that, while simultaneously processing what the oncologist had told us. And I want to tell you, if there is one single thing you do after watching this, go find your advance directive. If you don't have one, make one. Look up what a POLST form is in your state. Call an elder law attorney. Not because you're dying. You're probably not dying right now. But because the bureaucratic machinery of dying in this country is genuinely brutal. And you will be doing it on the worst days of your life, if you haven't done it ahead of time. I talked to a woman named Sandra. She's 64, an estate planning attorney in Ohio. She told me that 70% of the families she works with come to her after a diagnosis or after a death, meaning they are sorting out finances and paperwork and beneficiary designations in a state of acute grief. She said the cruelest part of her job is watching families have to make financial decisions while simultaneously making funeral arrangements. She told me about a client whose husband died without an updated will, and their eldest son, who they were estranged from over a falling out in 2019, was entitled to a portion of assets they had intended for their grandchildren, $300,000 in disputed claims. Family didn't speak for 2 years afterward, and this was a smart family, a financially comfortable family, not people who fell through the cracks, just people who assumed they'd get to it. I think about that a lot, the assumption that we'll get to it. Here's something that surprised me about getting a terminal diagnosis. I thought I would want to do everything. Bucket list, experiences, adventures, and maybe some people are like that. But what I actually wanted, almost immediately, was to stop tolerating things, That's the only way I can describe it. I stopped tolerating the job I had been doing in a half-hearted way for years. I retired the week after my diagnosis. I stopped tolerating the dinner parties where I spent 3 hours making small talk with people whose company I didn't actually enjoy. I stopped tolerating the version of myself who said yes to things out of habit rather than because I wanted to. And I've talked to other people who went through serious diagnoses and came through them. A guy in my group named Richard, 63, colon cancer. He's been in remission for 2 years. He said almost the same thing. He said the illness didn't make him appreciate sunsets. He stopped romanticizing it. He said it made him intolerant of his own pretense. He had spent 20 years in a career in finance that made him deeply unhappy, and he had been telling himself a story about why he had to stay. The diagnosis stripped the story away. He said it was like someone turned on a light in a room he'd been sitting in for years, telling himself was fine, and he could suddenly see all the furniture. He quit within 4 months of his all clear, and I want to be honest that this doesn't feel like a gift when you're in it. It doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like grief. Because when you finally see what you've been tolerating, you also see how long you've been tolerating it. That's the cost. Not just what you're giving up going forward, but all the years you already gave up. And that grief is specific and heavy and worth naming. There's a palliative care physician named Ira Byock who spent decades working in hospice, and he wrote about what dying people say matters most in those final weeks. It wasn't the things you'd expect. The 4 things that came up over and over were, please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. Just those 4. Across thousands of patients, across different religions and backgrounds and life circumstances. The things that mattered at the end were relationships that weren't finished, sentences that hadn't been said. And what I keep turning over is how many of those sentences could have been said years earlier, but weren't. The person didn't need to be dying to say, I forgive you. They just needed to decide it was worth the discomfort. My regrets fall into 3 categories. And I've thought about this carefully. The first is the conversations I delayed. My brother, a close friend I had a falling out with in 2008 over something so minor I can't even reconstruct the original argument, just the silence that followed. My kids, who I love, but with whom I was present in the way a lamp is present, physically there, light on, not actually in conversation with you. The second category is the things I let become my identity that weren't me at all. The way I worked, the status I attached to work, the fact that I measured my value by what I produced. I believed that right up until I couldn't produce anything, and then I had to figure out very quickly who I was without it. The third category is the body. The ways I didn't listen to it, the ways I pushed through exhaustion and pain and called it strength. I wasn't strong, I was disconnected, and I wonder sometimes if the disconnection from my own physical experience was the same pattern as the disconnection from the people I loved. Both were things I could feel just fine. I just kept telling myself to move through them. I want to say something about fear, because I know some of you are watching this, and the fear of what I'm describing, the decline, the dependence, The loss of being the version of yourself that you've built is significant. I know that because it's significant for me. I am more afraid of what I'll lose on the way to death than I am of death itself. I'm afraid of the version of me that can't drive, the version that needs help with basic things, the version that becomes a patient rather than a person. And I think that's actually the more honest fear for most people our age, not the darkness at the end, the diminishment along the way. And I don't have a clean answer for that. What I have is what Helen told me, which is that she does not see diminishment when she looks at me. She sees me, and maybe that's something to think about, whose voice you're hearing when you imagine that fear. Because I suspect for a lot of us, it's not the people who love us. It's something older and harder than that. I believe something comes after this. I don't know what, but based on what the science tells me about those final moments, based on what Dennis's wife Carol described with her hands reaching, based on what I feel on the good days in this body, I believe the ending is a continuation of something, not a wall. I am not certain of that. But I am less afraid than I expected to be, and I think the fear I do carry is for the people I'm leaving, not for wherever I'm going. Here's what I want you to do with this. Call the person you've been meaning to call, not today, right now. Don't finish watching and think about it. Go find your advance directive. Have the conversation with your spouse or your kids that you have been smoothing over because the right moment hasn't appeared. The right moment doesn't appear. You have to make it. I have less than a year probably, and I'm using it, not by doing extraordinary things, by finally being present in the ordinary ones. That's it. That's the whole lesson. And I wish it hadn't taken this to teach me. If this landed for you, if something in here felt true, leave a comment. Tell me what conversation you've been putting off. I read every single one. And subscribe if you want to stay in this with me, because I'm not done talking yet.